Where did the early memories go? Throughout this book, we have seen the importance of early experience to later life. Yet, as adults, most of us fail to remember anything significant that happened in our early years, like learning to walk and talk. And usually we have very sparse recollection of events that occurred to us before the age of 10. Kielstrom and Harek, 1982. How then can early experiences have a significant influence over our lives if we can't remember them? Let's investigate this paradox by exploring the pathways in which early experiences affect later outcomes. It is important to acknowledge that there is much we do not understand about how these pathways work exactly, and this is an area many researchers are working on. But here is what we do know. When people perceive their environment as threatening, challenging, or unexpected, they react with certain behavioural and physical responses. These responses are calls to action and include changes to the hormonal system, e.g. increased cortisol, to the immune system, and to the system that regulates heart rate, blood pressure, respiration and digestion. Gansel et al. 2010. In general, these changes cause us to behave in a way that makes the environment less stressful, and so in the long term they can increase our well-being. When the stress is relatively mild or short, like feeling hungry or cold, the response can be adaptive, as it motivates us to find food or warmth. However, if the stress is experienced over a long period is extreme, uncomfortable or unpredictable, like neglect, violence and abuse, it is much harder to adapt it to and can have negative outcomes for children. Why? Long-term stress causes us to experience the stress response over the long term, and this has some profound effects on the structure and functioning of the brain. Smith and Pollock, 2020. Specifically, the stress response has been shown to change the prefrontal cortex, an area associated with planning and decision making. That's not right, that's the marble. The frontal cortex is the reward and behaviour control. The hippocampus, associated with learning and memory, and the amygdala, associated with emotion and reward. For example, children who have experienced high levels of stress early in life, such as that caused by death, war, illness, conflict, natural disaster, neglect, discrimination or poverty, tend to have similar amygdala and hippocampal volumes than children exposed to less intense levels of early life stress. Hansen et al. 2015. I wonder who's right and wonder who's wrong. So on E104 we covered this, and the frontal cortex was gratification and reward and emotion response. In here that's saying it's something else, and in the E104 it said marble to control the other stuff, and now it's saying these different things. So I wonder who's right. Because infancy and childhood are sensitive periods for brain development, stresses experienced during this period can set the long-term expectations for what count as threats and rewards and how to deal with them. Hill et al. 2010. Children who experience physical abuse have higher sensitivity to angry facial expressions compared to non-maltreated children. Shachtman and Pollock 2014. They are more likely to judge emotional situations as angry situations. Pollock et al. 2000. They are more readily categorize faces that are morphed between two different emotions as angry. Pollock, Kistel 2002. And they tend to believe that almost any kind of interpersonal situation can result in an adult becoming angry. By contrast, most non-abused children associate anger with particular social circumstances. Pollock et al. 2009. So long-term stress experienced as critical time for brain development can change how we interact with our environment later on in life. This isn't perhaps what we usually think of as memory, and it is certainly not something we are usually consciously aware of, but this is one pathway by which past experience guide behaviour in the future, a basic definition of memory. This pathway does not mean we are deterministically don't know that word doomed to follow a particular course in life just because we experience a particular stress. The same stress can be experienced differently by different people. Recall orchids and dandelions, see chapter 2, with events that are perceived as being more under a person's control generally being easier to cope with. Pruesena et al. 2005. Caregivers and wider social networks also play a significant role in shaping children's responses to adversity, with the presence of predictable, stable and responsive figures helping to buffer some of the more harmful effects of stress. Hosner et al. 2015. A consistent finding is that the quality of family relationships is more important for children's well-being than the structure that family takes. For example, the level of parental stress is a better predictor of children's emotional and behavioural problems than whether they come from one parent, two parent, divorced, heterosexual, homosexual or adopted family structures. Golombek et al. 2014. Key points. Long-term stress experienced during critical periods of early brain development can alter how children perceive further future rewards and threats. Next, let's look at other part of the paradox, why we aren't aware of what happened in the early years. We make our first memories before we are born. Recall from chapter 5 how babies in utero are becoming sensitized to the sound world around them as soon as they are born. Infants can distinguish between novel sounds and sounds familiar to them from in utero, such as their mother's voice. I think they mean uterus. De Casper and Spence, 1986. The fact that newborn... it's not uterus, is it? It's what's it? Not the umbilical. I can't remember at this moment. The fact that some people eat them after birth. Placenta. The fact that newborns can do this presumably means they have been remembered their mother's voice from the womb. So even very young children can remember early experiences, but their memories of the details of the event are extremely fragile and prone to being forgotten, especially if the experiences are not frequently repeated. Viewer 2015. This means that part of the answer is that, quite simply, young infants are more prone to forgetting, but they get rapidly better at holding on to information for longer over the first months of life, using the same method we met in chapter 5, whereby infants learn to touch a light up box with their head through and observing others. Researchers have shown that 6-month-old infants are able to imitate an action they saw 24 hours earlier, but by 9 months old they remember actions they saw up to 5 weeks earlier, and by 10 months old they remember actions from 3 months earlier. Mullally and Maguire 2014. This behavioural development is underpinned by a parallel development in the hippocampus, an area of the brain thought to be important for the formation of memories of what, who, where and when. This area begins to function in the first years of life, and researchers full maturity between 3 and 5 years of age, right around the time most adults recall their first memories. Hutton-Locker and Double-Hocker 1997. Research also suggests children start out being relatively good at encoding separate parts of events, such as the objects involved and where it happened, but it takes time to bind these together into a coherent memory of what, who, where and when. For example, one study tested 4 and 6-year-olds and adults on their ability to recall isolated parts of pictures as well as combinations of these parts. Sluzensky et al. 2006. Children were shown a tiger in a playground and then asked to determine whether they had previously seen the animal, the tiger, the location, the playground, or the animal in the location, the tiger in the playground. Participants' memory scores of the animal and the location in isolation were similar across all 3 age groups. However, memory scores for combinations, i.e. animals in locations, increased between 4 and 6 years, but not between 6 years and adult. The fact that it takes time to develop the ability to bind the elements of the event together into a coherent whole might be another reason why early memories of events are difficult to retrieve. There are 2 other ideas as why our personal history of the first years is difficult to remember. One is that it takes time for the concept of self to emerge in development. That is, memories about things that happened to me require a me. For these events to happen to this is exposed more, section 10.5. We saw in chapter 3 how young children have to work out that they have intentions before they can work out that others might have beliefs, desires, and so on. These realizations of the self, and this self is different from others, are likely to place a further lower limit on how far back in time we can remember our personal history. Howie et al. 2003. Second is the relation between memory, language, acquisition. The basic idea here is that it might be difficult to use language to talk about memories. In those memories were first formed before language was acquired. In a study designed to directly explore this possibility, adults were asked to estimate when their earliest memories of range of concepts such as button, gorilla and mushroom stem from. Morrison and Conway 2010. The researchers found that ages of the earliest memory of the concept button, gorilla or mushroom were systematically later, but several months than the typical ages of acquisition of words button, gorilla or mushroom. This suggests that the word needed to be acquired first in order for the adults to be able to consciously recall memories associated with that word. However, a range of other mammals also have infantile amnesia, and they don't have human-like language or the same sense of self, so this cannot be the whole story. How? 2011. When the same function emerges across a range of species, it sometimes points to a shared evolutionary explanation. One integrity suggestion is infant forgetting allows babies to offload some memories related tasks to caregivers, such as how to navigate or find a reward, freeing up more brain power to learn about other aspects of the world. Reardon 2024. However, that strategy only works when they have cooperative caregivers on hand to pick up the slack, as humans do. When they have to fend for yourself from birth, that isn't an option. In support of this theory, guinea pigs and degus were independent from birth, do not experience infantile amnesia as far as we can tell. Akers et al. 2014. Key point. Neurological maturation, reduced forgetting, the ability to bind memories together, and a developing sense of self and language are factors that help explain why adults have difficulty remembering the first years of life. I'd personally just say it's pruning. Why would we need to remember what we were doing when we were a baby? Where did the early memories go? Throughout this book, we have seen the importance of early experience to later life. Yet, as adults, most of us fail to remember anything significant that happened in our early years, like learning to walk and talk. And usually we have very sparse recollection of events that occurred to us before the age of 10. Kielstrom and Harek 1982. How then can early experiences have a significant influence